Let's talk about the types of thinking versus critical thinking. But first, let's talk about thinking in general, which can be easily defined as a series of activities. And these activities are mental activities, invisible activities, intangible activities, which are done by the brain as a response to a trigger. This trigger is received by the one or more of the five senses. So we can view thinking or see the process of thinking as a mental process by which we process the sensory input to generate ideas. But viewing or seeing uh, the process of thinking from a holistic point of view is not really helpful because it's now well known. Rather than this, we can focus on the thinking activities because thinking activities or thinking skills are specific activities that we can practice, that we can learn, we can practice, and we can purposefully use to process ideas, and generally we process the sensory input to generate ideas. Actually, Edward de Bono, the Maltese philosopher, sees that the process of thinking can be improved because we can improve our thinking skills by training, by learning, training, practicing, so that can improve the process of thinking as a whole. And according to Bloom's taxonomy, the thinking skills can be categorized into two categories. The first category is the low order thinking skills, which are to remember or to know, then to understand, then to apply. So in the low order thinking skills, defined by as defined by Bloom's taxonomy, are three. The first level is uh, to remember or to know, then to understand, then to apply. And the high order thinking skills, which is the second category, the high order thinking skills can be defined as to analyze, to evaluate, then to create. So we have another set of three thinking skills in the high order thinking skills category, which are again to analyze, to evaluate, then to create. Okay. So, for example, if you are asked what's your name or what's your job, so this triggers this question, these kind of questions can trigger your low order thinking skills because you will depend on what you know. So you will answer with what you remember or what you know. So that triggers low order thinking skills. But when you are asked, for example, can you describe a scenario of the world without, for example, computers or without cars, so that will trigger or that will initiate the process of the process of thinking, depending on the high order thinking skills, okay, which are to analyze, to evaluate, and to create. So according to the trigger, so where some set or the high order thinking skills or the low order thinking skills will be actively started. Actually, almost all philosophers think that in order to reach the high order thinking skills, you have to fulfill the low order thinking skills. And actually, that makes sense because how a person who doesn't know anything about computers and their usage will give us a scenario about a word without computers. So in order to analyze or evaluate or to create, which are the high order thinking skills, we have to have very good idea about, or we have to practice the low order thinking skills. We have to fulfill the low order thinking skills, like to know, to understand, and to apply. That's why there isn't a good proof that a person can jump to high order thinking skills without passing through the low order thinking skills. It isn't, there is no evidence, in other words, there is no evidence or a good proof that a person can fulfill the high order thinking skills without fulfilling the low order thinking skills. Even maturity or normal development or getting order can help a person to do so. Okay, so in order to reach the high order thinking skills, it's very important to fulfill the low order thinking skills. Now let's talk about the types of thinking. But before we talk about the different types of thinking, let's categorize thinking into two categories according to effectiveness. So we have effective thinking and we have ineffective thinking, which is the opposite. In the process of effective thinking, or in the type of thinking which is effective, we depend on first sound methodology or logically valid approaches, and second, we depend on the best available information. And when we talk about the best available information, we mean that we depend on information which has high accuracy, and at the same time this information should be highly sufficient. In that way we can practice effective thinking. And you can imagine the opposite in the process of ineffective thinking. So now, according to effectiveness, we have two different types of thinking. Again, we have the effective thinking, we have ineffective thinking, which is the opposite. In effective thinking, we depend on sound methodology, which is logically valid approaches, and also we depend on the best available information. And by this we mean that we depend on information which has high level of accuracy and also which is highly sufficient. Now let's talk about how a lot of researchers try to describe thinking from different angles. So many researchers try to figure out the types of thinking. Okay, so we have a lot of different types of thinking as described by many researchers. For example, we'll go through them. For example, we have analytical thinking. We have concrete thinking. Also, we have creative thinking. We have convergent thinking. We have deductive thinking. We have divergent thinking, effective thinking, inductive thinking, productive thinking, lateral thinking, ineffective thinking that we talked about. We have emotional thinking. We have cognitive thinking, mathematical thinking, practical thinking, okay, abstract thinking, reflective thinking, holistic thinking, vertical thinking, verbal thinking, scientific thinking, metacognitive thinking, logical thinking, impulsive thinking, traditional thinking, and finally we have the most important type of them that we actually study is critical thinking.